Welcome in, people. Welcome back. I am Jeremy Toms, host of the Big Law Capitalist podcast. Great to have you in. Really excited for today's episode. I think you'll be excited too. We have Theresa Ward on as a guest today. She's an absolute rock star. She's based actually where I live, which is Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and she is killing it. You know, 75 plus flips a year, raising major money, doing really big things in real estate. But she has she has a really cool backstory, which I'm excited for you to hear. But also, she has some really good just insight into getting started, right, in investing, and coming from a place where you weren't an investor previously to now, she's an absolute rock star in a short period of time with a ton of you know extracurriculars that she had to sort of deal with to getting to that point, right? So, without further ado, I want to bring in Theresa. I'm excited. Let's do it. Theresa, what's up?
What's going on?
Welcome to the show. The Big Law Capitalist podcast could not be happier. Having you on. You're an absolute rock star. So I'm glad you're with us.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me. Like, you're killing
Absolutely.
it.
So
Yeah.
I'm trying my best. So I tried to give a brief intro, but I think you tell the story far better than I do. Obviously, tell us a little about yourself, right? Like, not so much like where you are now, right? We'll definitely get to that because it's everything and everywhere. But how you sort of got started, right? Like, where you grew up, where you went to school, and then, how you got to where you are now. Then we'll dive into the
Only real
really
estate,
like,
right? Just real estate.
yeah.
Yeah, so born and raised Pittsburgh in the Greenfield neighborhood, best neighborhood on the planet. Not biased, but yeah. So I went to Taylor Alderdice High School, and I was a teen mom in high school. Had Jordan when I was 16. So got that, and I bought my first house in 2007. No,
Gotcha.
yeah, 2007, right at the crisis, in the collapse.
Right
So
at the peak. Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, I was 19 years old then, working at Starbucks. So there's no reason I should have got that loan, but hey, I heard that there was great programs for single moms from predatory lender, and yeah, got the
Oh,
house that I
right.
wanted in the neighborhood. So that's kind of how I got into real estate without getting into real estate.
So that was like that first house was more so like I'm living here, but it did end up becoming sort of your first deal in a way.
Yeah, actually, yeah, I guess so. It
Oh
did.
man. All right.
It wasn't until
I want to hear
years
about that.
later. Yeah, right now.
Yeah. Let's dive into it because I actually this is one of the things I wanted to chat with you about was like that first deal because like the first deal story is always like a good learning experience. So yeah, I'd love
Yeah.
to.
Yeah, that's funny because I was trying to think about my first deal, and I'm like, I really don't know, but I guess this really was. So I was living in this one bedroom apartment with Jordan, and there was asbestos, and I wanted to get out of there before the winter came in. So I'm like looking for a place to rent, and I was working at Starbucks and in Squirrel Hill, ton of real estate investors, love networking, and the one gentleman there, he said that why rent when you can buy? I'm like, I can't. How can I buy? He's like, oh, there's programs for single moms. He's like, go find a house that you like. And I was like, well, I already know the house that I want because I saw a for sale by owner, and I had went to prom with the guy that was his grandparents' house. Okay, so there's a
Oh
wraparound
really?
porch, a lot, wanted it. So he's like, yeah, you can buy it. I'm like, okay, I didn't know how I could buy it, but I just trusted him. I knew he was a real estate broker and investor. So I, go downtown and sign all these paperwork. And my family's like, what do you mean you're buying a house? They couldn't. I'm like, I got it. I got it. I got it. I thought it was the greatest thing. And when, I got my first mortgage payment, I was told that it was going to be like $400 a month because I was renting.
Right.
That's how much my rent was at that time, $400 a month. And my total payment was $756.82. I'll never forget that. So I'm like, I
Yeah.
can't afford this. Yeah. So yeah, fast forward, I learned that he wholesaled or did a double close actually,
Ah.
property for 80,000, resold it the same day for 110. Said that he made improvements, overstated the value, had appraisers in his pocket, the bank in his pocket, fraudulent loan documents, and stated that had an
Wow.
account with 30 grand in it. But yeah, so
Wow.
that was first deal. Yeah.
Oh man. Oh, and so you live there, and then you just sell it. Like, did you do any work to it and then sell it later, or
No, actually, so I had my cousin move in with me to help pay
ah,
mortgage and
a little
things
form of
were
like house hacking? Yeah,
yeah, right. But then I eventually did like it foreclosed. So went through the foreclosure
gotcha.
process. Yeah, that was like I was maybe 3.5 years later, but I kind of lived rent free or mortgage free for like a year. Not on purpose. I filled out all these documents, hardship, and this like wrote the story every single time I got this packet. Like, this is the story, this is what happened, and send it in. I would hear nothing back. I'm like, okay, I don't know what to do.
Uh, and so from there, then that's like right, like humble beginnings, right? Like, and then you went from there. What was the next step for you?
Let's see, the next step. So started renting, and actually got into a rent to own deal. Um,
Oh, okay.
yeah, so we did a land contract. Um, we had to fix up the property because it was an FHA loan. So we had to fill
Mhm.
in this in-ground swimming pool that was old and bad. It wasn't working, functional. Put a fence in, put like 10,000 into this property here. That the land contract deal didn't work out how
Oh,
it was structured. So I'm like,
uh,
what the hell,
oh,
so,
yeah.
but I was
Oh,
married at this point, and we had our second child, and the house is, we would outgrow the house anyway. So I like, all right,
right.
meant to be. Um, yeah. So I'm
And,
like, all right,
and then what? So when was the leap to? Correct me if I'm wrong. When was the leap to Second Avenue? But I know that was one of the gigs you had, right?
yes,
Like
yep,
before the ascent, right?
right, right. So um, I got into real estate right from my network at the Starbucks group. So there's a ton of real estate investors there, and they said,
Really?
hey, yeah. So I had a house cleaning business, or clean
Okay.
investment properties, tenant turnovers, or after rehab for selling. And the one investor was like, hey, you want to make more money? Find find us vacant properties. So I was a bird dog. Went to
There
the
you go.
fortune builders meetings, taught me how to find properties. But then he had just got his broker's license. He's like, listen, you need to be licensed. I was like, I don't have the money to get a license. You told me I can make more. I'm like, can you help me pay for it? He's like, no. I'm like, what the heck? But that did was like made me accountable to keep continuing on. So
Right.
yeah, got the training, find properties. Then I got into as an agent for investors. So
Gotcha. Gotcha.
yeah,
And that's, I mean, that's where you kind of started really cutting your teeth on it, right? Like
yeah,
learning the trade, if you will. Yeah. And
yeah.
so,
Loved it.
fast forward now, right? So like, uh, sort of cut your teeth there, got your training, created, I'm assuming some really, really, really good relationships.
Yeah,
And essentially you've gone from there to kind of give the audience an idea, like where you are now, like because it blew when you told me the first time I met you. Actually, give you a little background. First time I
yeah,
met you, was through our real estate meetup group here in Pittsburgh, um, the RIG group, Resilient Investors Group. And so I met you, and like sweetest person, right? Just the absolute sweetest person I'd ever met. And I'm just assuming like everybody here just kind of just, we're doing stuff, it's pretty cool. But like I had no idea like we were in the presence of an absolute rock star. Like
oh, stop.
you blew my mind. When you told me like just exactly what you were doing, what your plans were, like ambition's not even doesn't even truly define like what you're bringing to the table. You're just going for it. I'm super excited for you, but like for the audience, for their sake, just let us know like all the stuff you have going.
Yeah, I was working with the investor. I was sourcing properties, and I was sourcing investors in like the New York area, Manhattan. I'm like, okay, their money can
Mhm.
go a lot further here. And I, met institutional investor, and they came to town. They met with me, and they're like, we're buying, $100 million worth of properties. It's like, there's no way, because at this point in time in Pittsburgh, they weren't here. They weren't
Right.
buying single family rentals. And I remember they had this networking group, and there was a ton of people there, and no one took them seriously. But I'm like, I do. So like the first
Yeah.
week, I just made a Google spreadsheet, 100 properties off market. Here's the details. And then the COO called. He's like, who sourced these? Like, I'm like, I did. Found them, because they were saying no to everything. I'm like, you have to. This is a good deal. This is not. Like, tell me, I'm committed. So then they
Yeah.
had offered me a job and I declined it. And then they offered me another one, declined it again. And I'm like, all right, if I'm going to work, if I'm going to leave and become a corporate employee, like this is what I want. And they're like, what?
Yeah.
You don't have the experience. And I didn't even know what I was getting into. So like, okay, well, so, we'll hire you as an assistant manager to deploy this capital with no manager above me, right? And then
Right.
with 30 days, my, you know, got promoted and bonus. So I was in charge of buying properties that would net the yield that they were looking for within their risk profile, right? So single
They had
family,
like a what would you call like a buy
buy,
box, right? Like yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yep.
certain buy box, and yeah, in charge of building these portfolios of single family homes. And I'm seeing like what's happening in these little neighborhoods, right? Of
Hmm.
rent values going up. I'm underwriting properties at a certain amount, and then you have a different department pushing those rents higher. And I'm like,
Right.
whoa, whoa, and you see what happens to these like, little neighborhoods across the court. I'm like, okay, and how much money they're making. Now I know how fund structures work, right?
Mhm.
And just wanted to get into doing it on my own, and kind of helping
Yep.
people and getting into impact investing. So I saw like what impact investing is, and like we can do
Yeah.
this.
Let's
Yeah.
dive into that for a second, right? Because I think that's a really cool concept that I don't think a lot of people are familiar with. What do you mean by impact investing?
So impact investing is really just investing money and getting a financial return, but you're also doing social good, right? Social or
Yep.
environmental good. So for real estate here, it could be for affordable housing, and not like Section 8 or government funds, although that does work in certain structures with the companies. But or another way would be like, green building or green. But for
Right. Right.
us, we're
Something with like
doing,
a sort of a social impact, right?
yeah. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, so going back also to my earlier days of sourcing properties, I found this one gentleman who moved here from out of the country, very smart, creatively bought 40 some houses for like almost nothing, like house hack,
Hmm.
all of these. So he has some in their portfolio. They're distressed. Half of them are occupied, half of them are vacant. And his whole thing is he wants to use these to retire, make 65 grand a year to retire, and then leave money to his kids, a couple $1,000,000 to his kids. And
Right.
7 years, I'd approached this portfolio in so many ways. He wouldn't take any discount. He was committed. He had his motivators. And now I'm like, okay, fast forward, they're still here. We can make this deal work. And we could do
Yeah.
that by, this impact fund that we're setting up right now. It's like super exciting. So the fund money that we're raising for that will be able to purchase the properties, renovate them, stabilize, and then have an equity play and a yield play at the same time while creating.
So that's one of the real. And how much is that fund that you're looking to raise?
$5 million.
It's fantastic. There it
Yeah,
is. So
yeah,
like one of the things that struck me was you're like me in a lot of ways in that I mean far better at it, but you're like me in a lot of ways, which is you are you're you're not only are you ambitious, but you're willing to sort of step out of your comfort zones, right? Like one of the early conversations we had was like structuring like a real estate fund, right? And there's people who talk about it, right? And then there's people who actually do it. You're a doer, right? You get out and you actually do the stuff. You learn the concepts. You dive in deep and you do it, right? You put the money behind it and you just go for it, which I think is a really, really not only is that awesome, but it's also like a really good quality to have. Um, which is, I mean, obviously why, people are jumping in to invest with you, institutional capital, and I'm sure as well, high net worth. But let me ask you, so to the typical investor, right? Like, so our audience essentially are, high income professionals, right? Who have a lot of cash, or may have a lot of cash or, a decent net worth or high net worth, but not a ton of time, right? To really kind of deploy that. Um, but they might be thinking in their heads, like, partnerships, like should I like trust somebody else or should I jump in bed with somebody to try to improve my situation, but take on the risk of like counting on somebody else, right? And I think there's a lot that goes into that, but like just from a high level, from a beginner standpoint, what's your thoughts on partnering early on? Because I think partnering's been important for you obviously, being able to
right.
create what you've created.
Right. Yeah, I couldn't have done anything without partnering. And I think it's just that relationship, that constant conversation and education. Like, so you can invest money into the stock market and not know what's going to happen, right? You can try to
Right.
study and be educated as much as you can, but there's so much at play.
Yep.
With real estate and investing, it's fun, right? It's numbers, and you can see, and building that relationship also gains trust. And like, okay, you know what you're doing. Yes, there is risk. There's risk for anyone involved, and high risk, hopefully high return. It's like
Yep.
feeling the people out, but you gotta jump in at some point, whatever that is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what's funny is people will ask me like, well, people will tell me, and this is a couple of years ago, like, wow, well, why wouldn't I just keep my money in the market? Like, look at the returns I'm getting, and they'll sort of like reference all of this different, like all these different reasons as to why like real estate they just haven't made the dive yet, and they'll say one of the bigger reasons is like, how do I know I can trust this operator, right? How do I know I can trust this sponsor? And I'm like, dude, how do you know you can trust anybody who you're investing with in the stock market? Like, do you know them personally? Like, no.
Right.
Like, no, you don't. Like, you don't really, and a lot of people who are investing in the stock market, I'm certain they're not going on, Edgar, right, the SEC website, looking at like financial disclosures and like, different filings. That's not a thing. What they're doing is sticking with what's comfortable, right? But I think a lot of people miss out on the fact that like investing, especially with somebody like yourself or with our firm, like, with our firm, New Homes, it's there's no work involved other than like wiring the money, right?
Right.
And so like really then it just comes down to like, hey, can these people act on their business plan?
Right.
And I think that's the part where like there's some disconnect between like people who have the cash, but they're just like, oh, well, I'm nervous. I can't take on more, obligations. I have this, and that going on. I'm like, dude, like if you think it's any different than the stock market, then like that's where the education piece has to happen. Like, right, that's what me and you are for. It's like it's not. You're catching the Schedule K1 at the end of the year, and like you're sitting back and catching your returns. So
Right.
I always try to advise people like partnerships are important. You got to learn to trust people sooner or later. And the reality is you got to do that if you want to ever grow. The sort of machine, right, that you've been able to grow. With what you got going. So
Right.
I completely agree with you.
It's funny, family's much more difficult than friends or strangers, I think. To
Right? Yeah. Like,
my parents started out like, oh, you don't know what you're doing. Like, yeah. I mean, and that's the thing though, like we've been through the ropes, right? Like
mhm.
I'm all in. So it's all of my money is reinvested because I believe in it.
Yep.
There's a bigger purpose to this for me. So that's what keeps driving it. And it's there's no emotional investment into the property itself, but into
Right.
the whole fund and like that impact to investing as well. So yes, promise to my financial investors, right? They have to get a return. And that's all it is.
Right.
It's relationships. And then we have to make the people buy the houses, make sure that's set up right, or rent the properties, make sure they're properly vetted. And for the investor, it's like it's a full service. We purchase the properties based on however kind of risk you want to take, your
Mhm.
personality, and your money, and your play. Renovate them, rent them out, manage them, just collect your check,
Yeah,
and
right? Like and
enjoy. Yeah.
question, so how many, and this number blew my mind when you told me, but how many, just for the audience, how many properties would you say on like an annual basis are you flipping right now?
Last year, so it was helping manage, right? The 108 property flips and then
Phew.
purchasing 265
Goodness
homes.
gracious.
Yeah.
Goodness gracious. Oh my goodness. Wow.
That's my contractor, all props to him. So,
Yeah, right? It's a team effort for sure.
yes. And that's a
Uh
partnership there too, as well. So everybody
right.
wants skin in the game in return. So that's how I look at it.
People will ask me like, because and I'm busy, right? Like you're slam busy, and I'm busy. Like we have two kids, another one on the way, so like that's a whole obligation, right? And then I'm an attorney. That's more than a full-time job in and of itself. And then we're running New Homes Capital Management. That's another gig, right? And then I have my own set of portfolio properties that I own just individually. And so people will ask me like, how do you navigate that? Like, that's chaos. And I'm like, no, 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 that's a team effort, dude. Like
Yeah.
that's not just me, right? First off, my wife is a saint because she allows me to kind of do all the extra stuff, that
Right.
sort of has created this wealth for us. But then on top of that, like that's like virtual assistants, that's like really good property management firms. That's a high quality contractor. That's any number of things that create this sort of synergy that allows us to really kind of play with the numbers, right? Like kind of play the game in real estate and allows us to do it. But none of that stuff happens in a vacuum. None of it happens alone. So it's so you're like the master at that. You've created a number of teams. How many businesses at this point? Not like LLCs, but how many businesses would you say you own at this point?
So we have, I say we because it's a team effort, right? It's a real
Mhm.
estate brokerage, do property management, house flipping, and now we're starting this fun in the middle of acquiring real estate technology. So, but
A real
you
like a
know,
real estate technology company, right?
yeah, real estate technology, and like you said, it's like in the one book, Good to Great, I read is it's first who's on the bus, and then you determine where you're driving it, right? So it's that key players, partnerships. What are your strengths? Okay, take it and lead with it. Like, and
Yep.
those are the relationships, that trust factor. It's like, okay, you're skilled, you have a passion and a drive for it. You know what you're doing, run with it. If there's an issue, be humble and say, hey, I don't know how to figure this out. I don't know everything, right? But I know who to ask, and I'm okay to say, you know what, I can get the answer. Like, let's figure it out
That's the
together.
biggest thing, right? Like, is that like the fear of asking questions, right? Or looking stupid. Like, no, like that's how you like prolong the lack of passive income is like, all right, I'm just gonna, try to figure it out on my own and not, reach out to people and create relationships with people who do it well and who can teach me a thing or two. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people who just they're very intelligent people and they don't want to sort of have to be taught something that they feel like they probably can learn on their own. And I'm like, you can fast forward that. Like there's a button for that. You can push it
Right.
and like and move this thing forward. You just have to be willing and humble enough to do so. And it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. Like that means like you might have just pressed the fast forward button on early retirement or
Yes.
legacy wealth,
Yes.
and so that it's like it's critical, but it's also a hard lesson to learn for like people who
Right.
are otherwise successful.
and
Um,
it's hard to know, right, before jumping in all the questions that you have. So you can have like this analysis paralysis. What if there's so many variables, especially in real estate. Those questions are going to come up when you're in it, and then you start asking. Be humble. It's okay. Like, if we don't know, it's always happened before, right? And you have a group of
yep.
people that, okay, hey, there's many different ways out of this situation too, and it's always a win-win. Like, I believe there's always a win-win. Yeah.
And that's what's cool too about real estate and just investing, in this space is that like it's kind of hard to reinvent the wheel, because like at the end of the day, what you're doing is, going through acquisition, likely improvements, rent bumps or however whatever the business plan is, disposition, right? Like you can't really make that sausage any differently. Like that is what it is. But so it really then comes down to like execution, which is why I think it's so cool. So the businesses you kind of rattled off, like you, your company's just completely integrated, right? Like you can kind of hit every facet of the cycle.
It had to be almost right away, and it's like it's hard when you first starting up, is because you want to provide that full service platform, right, for the investor that wants to be hands off and needs to be, right. They're
Yep.
skilled in their industry. We need them in the world, so you have to provide all of that.
So let's dive big picture, right? Because I think um, I'm I'm excited because I get to be like on the front row of like watching you take off. Like just invite me when you do have the private jet. Let's fly wherever. Like
Yeah.
wherever you're going, I'm happy to tag along. Let's do that.
All right.
Um, but like big picture, like, and I love your goals because they're not just like I want to be super wealthy and rich. Like that's cool, whatever. Like that's what you're into, but that's fine. But like you have a bigger like picture, a bigger goal, a more wholesome sort of vision. Can you dive into that a little bit? Like what's your end goal? What are you super passionate about?
So my end goal, well, maybe I guess would say next goal, right? So real estate, I believe it's an avenue for to fulfill any dream in life. So think big, like biggest dream in life that you think it's not achievable, it is, and I think it's you can get there through real estate. And for me, it's I want to start a high school, open a high school. So it's raising the money, making the money from real estate and building the relationships with people, right, that are in the public sector and the private sector to be able to do that. And hopefully by 2030, that's the plan, and we'll open up. And I just think there's a lot of wealth too in the minds of like the youth that don't have
Mhm.
access to the resources or the networks or the connections, and we're really losing as a whole, right?
Yeah, when you told me that, I was blown away. And you know what? It's funny, like you opened my eyes again, right? Like because when we were talking and I was like, "Oh yeah," like you almost forget because you get so in the weeds of the business, like you look up and you're like, "Oh, dude, it's been 3 years. Like we've been growing this company and doing all this stuff and everything's happening and everything's coming at us a million miles an hour." And you kind of forget like, "Oh yeah, there's a bigger picture to this. There's a reason, right? Like that's not just like, oh, I want to be wealthier or I want to work less. There's like a true social impact sort of reason
So
underneath
what?
it all. I don't care who you are, right? But it's easy to lose sight of that. So that's what's really cool about you is you didn't lose sight of that. And like it then reminded me like, oh yeah, don't lose sight of the fact that like you can affect genuine change with real estate. Like you can create not only legacy wealth, but like legacies for other people. You can sort of become the conduit through which like other people can grow into who they truly should be or like reach the level they're supposed to reach, or have the capability of reaching, you know but with lack the resources. So I mean, you blew my mind in a lot of different ways, but like that one was like, all right, okay, she's like the definition of a rock star.
Oh,
I've just loved watching the
can't
ascent.
hang
It's been
out with you too
fantastic.
much. Yeah, gonna give me a big ego here. I mean, anything like I was at the JCC. Jordan went played basketball there, and like on the walls, we inherit the planet, right, from our
Right,
children to leave it back better to them. And I'm like, geez, how do we? That's a huge weight, right? And like
right,
his peers was the one thing that I saw, right? How do we impact his peers growing up? His environment, because that was the biggest influence for me is connections, people helping me throughout the way, just being like guardian angels.
yeah,
Um, and it's like, all right, so where's that intersection of what are you extremely passionate about? Um, what makes you the most money? And what can you be the best in the world at, right? So what are your
oh there you go.
skills, and that's your
Yeah,
purpose. That's what I think. Like, so because I can get distracted so easily. Oh, this is great, this is great, this is great. No, where do these three lines intersect? And that's the hedgehog concept Jim Collins mentions too. So every time it's like, okay, is it in these three lines, yes or no? Okay, if not, can't focus on that.
well, first off, it goes without saying, I'm already incredibly proud of you. You've done far more than enough. But I mean, what you're about to do is even better. And I'm just super excited for what happens next. So now that, you've told the world the story, right? Like I'm excited for, our audience and other people to kind of see what I see, every time we're around each other, which is like an absolute rock star who's doing really cool stuff and has nothing but unlimited potential. So I want to say thank you first off for being on the show. I
Thank
want to,
you.
give a quick shout out to the audience and say like, look, if you want to go like next level, right? I always say like level up. Just watch this episode and listen to Theresa. Follow her on LinkedIn. Like check out her socials. We'll make sure to drop those in the show notes. Theresa, you're a rock star. I can't thank you enough. I'm really excited for what happens next. So
Thank you.
we'll wrap it up here. But
God willing. Yeah, we'll see. Let's go.
oh, by the way, people, just so you know, Teresa's doing all this stuff and she has 4 kids.
Four.
That's
Four.
mind blowing. You're a
Yeah.
superhero. That's
Yeah.
insane. So,
Thank you.
well, thank you so much. I appreciate it again. I'll catch up with you soon.
All right. Thanks, Jeremy.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Peace. All right, we did it. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode. I really, really do appreciate it. Do me a big favor. If you want to be a part of the Big Law Capitalist community to stay up to date with all of our latest episodes, you gotta hit that subscribe button. Super important. But I can't thank you enough for joining me this week. I'll see you next time. Peace.